If you ever lived in New York or Philadelphia, in the first half of the 20th century, there is a place you will never forget. You walked in off the street, and there in front of you was a great gleaming wall of tiny glass doors, hundreds of them, each one framed in polished brass. And behind every little window sat a dish of food, a slice of lemon meringue pie, a bowl of baked beans, a chicken pot pie, a wedge of cheesecake. You dropped a nickel into a slot. You turned a little chrome knob, the glass door swung open, and the food was yours. No waiters, no menus to order from, no tipping, just you, a handful of coins, and a wall of small glass windows full of supper. It was called the Automat, and at its peak, it served around 800,000 people every single day. In fact, with only about 180 locations, all of them in just 2 cities, the Automat was, for a time, the largest restaurant chain in the entire world. And then, in 1991, the glass doors of the very last one swung shut, and one of the most beloved institutions in American life quietly disappeared. Now, if you have ever seen an old photograph of that wall of little chrome doors, you probably think of the Automat as a charming novelty, a quaint old gimmick that modern fast food came along and improved upon. And that is exactly backwards. The truth, the thing almost everyone gets wrong, is that the Automat was not replaced by fast food. The Automat was the original fast food. And this is the story of how the restaurant that invented the future of American eating was devoured by its own children. And by the end, I will show you the one precious thing we lost. Along with it, something no drive-thru has ever brought back. Our story begins in Philadelphia in 1888, when 2 men, Joseph Horn and Frank Hardart, opened a small lunchroom together. A few years later, Joseph Horn traveled to Europe, and in the city of Berlin, he saw something that stopped him cold. A strange new kind of restaurant, invented by a German named Max Seeloff, that served food to people through automated machines with no waiters at all. Horn was captivated. He convinced his partner, and in 1902, using machinery shipped all the way from that Berlin factory, they opened the first Automat in America on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. A decade later, in 1912, they brought it to Times Square in New York City, and America had never seen anything like it. Here is how the magic worked. You would step up to that wall of little glass compartments and read it the way you would read a menu, looking at the actual food behind each window. You dropped your coins in the slot. You turned the knob. The door opened, and you lifted out your plate. And then, if you watched closely, you would see the empty compartment behind the glass, and a moment later, an unseen hand would reach in from the kitchen behind the wall and set a fresh dish in its place. To a customer, the food appeared as if by magic. But of course, it was no machine at all. It was a full, working restaurant that had simply moved all of its cooks and its labor out of sight, behind the wall. Now, plenty of clever ideas come and go. What made the Automat an American institution for half a century is that it did 3 things better than anyone. The first was the sheer wonder of it. In an age before anyone had ever seen a vending machine that could serve a hot meal, the Automat felt like stepping into the future. The food appeared behind glass, at the drop of a coin, with no one waiting on you. Children pressed their noses to the little windows. Adults marveled at it. It was fast and clean and modern in a way that genuinely thrilled people. The second was that, unlike so much cheap food, it was actually good. The Automat's coffee became legendary, freshly brewed every 20 minutes, poured from ornate spouts shaped like the heads of dolphins, and for decades it cost just a nickel a cup. The food behind the windows was real comfort food, made fresh every day in the company's own kitchens. The pies, the macaroni and cheese, the chicken pot pie, the creamed spinach. This was fast, cheap, self-service food, made to a consistent standard, sold to enormous crowds, which is to say, it was the very first fast food in America, decades before anyone had ever heard of a golden arch. And the third thing, the thing that made the Automat truly beloved, was that it was one of the most democratic places in all of American life. Think about it. With no waiters, there was no one to look down on you, no one to seat you by your clothes, no bill to tip on. And so at the Automat, a wealthy banker in a fine suit and a laborer in work clothes dropped the very same nickel into the very same slot and sat at the very same marble table side by side. An immigrant who barely spoke a word of English could simply point and drop a coin and eat with dignity. And during the Great Depression, the Automat became a refuge for the whole struggling city. A nickel bought a hot cup of coffee and a warm, bright place to sit for as long as you liked. Everyone was equal at the Automat, and you may well remember the ritual of it yourself. The fistful of nickels, reading that wall of little windows, the satisfying click as the small glass door swung open. Through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, the Automat reached its golden age. It became woven into the very fabric of city life. It appeared in movies and in songs. The great Irving Berlin even wrote a tune about lingering over another cup of its coffee. Celebrities ate there beside working people. It fed the whole city, rich and poor, hurried and lonely, all together under one gleaming roof. For half a century, from the outside, the Automat seemed as permanent as the city itself. But hidden in the very design of the Automat were two dependencies so deep that almost no one noticed them until the world began to pull them out from underneath it. The fall of the Automat came from three forces, and the third one is the one that everyone gets wrong. The first force was that the city itself began to empty out. The entire Automat model depended on one thing above all: enormous crowds of people, on foot, in a dense downtown. But after the Second World War, Americans began leaving the cities in their millions, moving out to the suburbs, and by the 1950s, the population of New York City itself was starting to fall. The Automat had no answer for this, because its whole existence was built into the sidewalks of the crowded city. It could not simply pick up and follow its customers out to the suburbs. The deep urban roots that had made it great had become a cage it could not escape. The second force was that the nickel died. Remember, the entire magic of the Automat ran on coins, a nickel in the slot, a turn of the knob. But through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, inflation pushed prices higher and higher, and a wall of little coin-operated doors simply could not keep up with a world where a sandwich no longer cost a nickel or two. Retrofitting all those machines to take more and more coins was clumsy and awkward. And worse, the romance of it, the whole enchantment of the nickel Automat, quietly died along with the nickel itself. The Automat had been built for a five-and-dime world, and that world was gone. And the third force is the great, sad irony at the heart of this whole story. Because the thing that finally killed the Automat was the Automat's own idea. Remember, the Automat had invented American fast food: quick, cheap, standardized, self-service, no waiters. And in the 1950s and 60s, a new generation of companies took that exact idea and rebuilt it for the new, suburban America. McDonald's, Burger King, the very same core concept: fast, cheap, standardized food you serve yourself, but now on a suburban highway with a big parking lot and eventually a drive-through window, so you never even had to leave your car. The Automat could not move outdoors, and so its own invention, set loose upon the world, turned around and came back to eat its lunch. And that brings us to the most heartbreaking decision in this entire story. Because by the 1960s and 70s, as the Automats were fading, Horn Hardart made a choice that is one of the most bitterly ironic in all of American business. Rather than simply die, the company decided to survive by joining the enemy. The company that had invented American fast food went out and bought franchises of the very fast food that was killing it. Horn Hardart became an operator of Burger King restaurants, and Arby's, and a fried chicken chain called Bojangles. And it went further still. It began gutting its own beautiful marble and brass automats, those gleaming temples of glass and polished chrome, and converting them into Burger Kings. Just picture that for a moment. The cathedral of the nickel and the little glass door, torn out and refitted with a plastic drive-through menu board. And there is a hard truth in that decision. Sometimes there is a fate worse for a company than simply closing its doors, and that is surviving by becoming the very thing that beat you. Horn Hardart, the corporation, lived on for a good while yet. But the Automat, the wonder of it, the magic that had made it matter that was already dead, To keep its lights burning, it had quietly traded away its own soul. After that, the end came slowly, and then it was over. One by one, the automats went dark. The company tried everything to save the last of them: new menus, brighter modern decor, but nothing could turn back the tide of suburban drive-thrus. And on the 9th of April, 1991, on 42nd Street in New York City, the glass doors of the very last Horn Hardart Automat in America swung closed for good, ending nearly 90 years of history. A single nickel had once opened those little doors. Now, they were locked forever. And yet, the Automat has never quite disappeared from the American memory. A great 35-foot section of the original 1902 Philadelphia Automat, all mirrors and marble and gleaming brass, was carefully preserved and displayed at the Smithsonian. In 2021, a loving documentary brought together the people who had cherished it, including the comedian Mel Brooks, who to this day will tell anyone who asks that the coffee was the best he ever had. And in recent years, the Horn Hardart name itself has even been revived. But the wall of little glass doors, and the fistful of nickels, and the whole great city sitting down to eat together, that is gone. So what do we take from all of this? There is a business lesson here about the danger of a model so perfectly built for one world that it cannot survive the next. But the Automat is not really an ordinary business story, and the lesson that stays with me is a deeper one. Because the Automat was never truly about the machines, or the coins, or even the pie behind the glass. It was one of the last genuinely democratic rooms in American life. It was a warm, bright, crowded public place where a banker in a fine suit and a bricklayer in work clothes dropped the same coin into the same slot and sat at the same marble table, and no one served anyone, and no one was above anyone. And a lonely person could sit for an hour over a nickel cup of coffee and be surrounded by the whole living, breathing city. And think about what replaced it. The drive-thru is the exact opposite of all of that. You pull up alone, in your car. You speak your order into a plastic box. You take your paper bag through a window, and you drive away, and you never once see another human face. We got our food faster, and cheaper, and more convenient than ever. But somewhere in that trade, quietly, we stopped eating together. The Automat's idea won so completely that it is now everywhere on Earth. But the warm public room where the whole city met as equals the room its idea was born inside of that, no drive-thru has ever given back. Now I would love to hear from you. Do you remember the Automat? Do you remember the coffee from the dolphin spouts? Or the pie waiting behind the little glass door? Or the feeling of a fistful of nickels in your hand? Leave a comment below and share the memory. And if this story took you back, take a moment to subscribe, because here on this channel, we tell these stories one at a time. After all, every empire has its rise, and every rise has its fall.